you're going to go first.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to flip the script, as we call it, and start with the way we concluded. How's that sound? So this is really our summation of the work that we've done, and as we go beyond this, you'll see how we got to this point. But we're facing a tipping point, as many of you might refer to. I'm James Clark. I am from Trinity Church, Wall Street. I work with churches all over the world in identifying, discerning, planning, and developing property that they control for income-producing purposes. And that income is to support the ongoing ministry and work of that church, but also to have a social impact in the communities they serve. So I'm sure you've heard of double bottom line. We provide the training, we provide the strategic guidance, and we provide the money to advance those projects and then redevelopment work here today. So as I was saying, we're hitting a tipping point where churches which really provide, there's a statistic that you'll hear, but over 40% of the safety net services within communities would only get 11% of the funding of philanthropic sources for the work that they do. They're at risk. Many of their properties are at risk of transitioning. And the factors that are influencing that are declining income, aging facilities, declining parishes. At the same time, the stress of the pandemic, which has had tremendous stress on leadership with transitions in leaders. And also has caused many churches to rethink their physical assets because virtual church is working. There are a lot of parishioners who are appreciating the fact that they don't have to come every Sunday. So you have this confluence of factors which is creating a real urgency. Plus you have the development community that's looking at faith-based real estate and seeing it as a opportunity to develop, especially in infill markets, to develop properties and projects that will have economic benefits to the development community. And so what this has caused is a urgent situation where church leaders are being asked to make short-term decisions with long-term assets. And the challenge they face is many are not equipped. They don't have the organizational capacity to make good strategic decisions with their real estate. And many of them are too busy dealing with the first priority, which is the pastoral work of the churches, to even give the appropriate time to making those decisions. So what do? We want to bring our strength to the development of a national movement that creates behavior change and systems. And that national movement will identify what I just said. And raise the consciousness of something that needs to be done so that we don't lose these vital institutions and the work that they're doing in communities. And we really have a four-pronged approach. As I mentioned, it's both a short-term urgency that needs something that we can do now, but also there's a long-term solution that's going to require training and building organizational capacity. That doesn't happen overnight. And so the four-pronged approach, I asked my team, do you want to split these up or you want me to talk about it? Okay. First is flipping the script. So again, what I described, you'll see a lot of articles, they're apocalyptic. The church is dying, the church is over, think things are not going to be the same. Well, but there are a lot of good stories. We saw the video from the project in Louisville. There are a lot of great stories that need to be told. And it's like the biblical example of the pearl of great price. When you realize the potential of what you have and what can be done, it changes your whole perspective. And you start to think strategically rather than out of a mindset of crisis. So flipping the script is largely a communications effort to get the word out, to share across denominations the potential of faith-based real estate development. Organizational capacity, building the ability to steward the church and its assets well. That gets to training, and it gets to providing augmented support that has the expertise to help churches do this work. Asset analysis is identifying the assets spiritually and materially in civic and sacred spaces. So again, if you don't know the potential of what you have, you won't make the sound decisions with it. So helping churches to identify their portfolios, their assets, to understand the potential development value, both economically, but also the potential for that property to fulfill and align with the missional priorities of the church and the needs of the community, all goes into understanding the asset that you have and the potential. And then finally, runway funds. So what's really needed is capital to get through a period of time so that the church can plan. And that may mean repairing dilapidated facilities. It may mean meeting code compliance. There are a series of things, but generally churches need, and we're identifying probably 3 years to really identify what they have, develop a plan, and begin to organize to implement that plan. And so one idea that we have is really to come up with runway funds that buys them some runway to be able to make a strategic decision. And those funds can come in a number of sources. One is obviously direct funds, although we realize you need to tap into the financial infrastructure that already exists for community financing. So for CDFIs in the room, there's a great opportunity to create a funding vehicle that many of you may remember the PPP program, which was a great way that the government got hundreds of billions of dollars to local communities very quickly. And they smartly used the banking system to do that. The banks underwrote the loans, they processed the loans, and they did the loan administration. And it also helped the banks. Similarly, there's an opportunity to work with the CDFI community if we create a capacity of funds that can work with churches in a similar regard. So I think that I'm gonna stop right there and turn it over to my team to take you to how we got to this point. Thank you.
Great. I'm Laura Merrill. I'm sorry. Yes, no, I know. I'm going to talk fast. Laura Merrill, Methodist preacher with a microphone, going to talk fast anyway. Austin, Texas, district superintendent working with churches in a very hot real estate market. So we really felt like we didn't like the question of the problem statement. We were struck yesterday in particular, I think it was Brother Derek who said, why do we have to start with the problem? Let's start with the assets. So this is our statement. How might we assist churches in this context of urgency to retain, activate, and steward their assets in alignment with their mission for the sake of place-based community flourishing? And that context you can see around it. So that's our design challenge, but where we really wanted to stand is on the next slide, which is, why is this the right thing to do? What is the moral authority? This, we think, is the place to start rather than from the problem. And you did hear the stat about faith-based, 40% of social safety net spending. This is, the moral authority, and we are church folk in this group, diverse types of people, but we want to stand in that place that says this is the right thing to do because of the opportunity cost if we don't do it. What is lost in the people of God, what is lost in the potential for shalom in our communities, and we are agents who can do this. We know this story. This is who we are. We've got to live that out. And so that becomes a place where we start. And that's enough of that. Who's next? What's the next slide? Who is working on this? Yeah, y'all, we all have similar lists, I'm sure, to the rest of y'all.
Next slide, 5. That's our social analysis, I guess. And you have it on the 6th. And this runway here, I'll go here. So we thought about just getting, I'm Donna Scomper, I'm the co-founder of Bricks and Mortals in New York City and a UCC and American Baptist pastor. We thought about our best idea being just to ask you all for a lot of money. And since we figured out there was going to be a lot of that, we decided to tell you that what we're going to do Back to our big idea, please. We will bring our strength. Nothing about us without us. And we will bring our strength to build a movement of sacred sites that have civic value and need to be saved. And we will bring our sense of an emergency to this work. Now, yesterday, not a year from now, not a national movement, now. So if anybody wants to help fund this work, we are going to do it. We are doing it, and we are severely undercapacitated. I personally would like to train another dozen people to do what I know how to do with 67 churches nationally right now. I want to do it that way. We got to build it. Otherwise, these assets will be gone, and they will be gone forever. That's a long time. If we lose 40% of the social value these organizations bring, that's a lot of social value to communities. But what about adding another 40% of social value in different ways with spiritual entrepreneurship, new ways to live, to pray, another day, another way. So we are bringing our energy to whatever money we can find.
That's great news. That's great news. Good job. So Ann Evans from Faith on Main Street is next.
Thank you. We want to take a page from our friends here, and we'll start with our problem statement. But then we want to go quickly. I'd like to go quickly to our last page again also, after telling you this. One of the things that we focused on is the fact that for us to have Faith on Main Street as an active movement, we really need to begin to tell the stories of all the wonderful things that are happening. So we said that we see the problem as the need to amplify the stories and work of those who are actually already out there using their imagination to create thriving neighborhoods and relationships. And the task in front of us is for all of us to begin to bring these stories up as a learning tool for all of us. So last slide, please. If you could go all the way to the end for me, that would be great. So we realized that we were actually reminding ourselves, all of us here, and there have been some fantastic panels who have helped us with this, that the unseen gifts that are out there need to be seen. There's wonderful work being done. Where is it? Who is it? How can we all learn from them? What are those lessons? And that it is all about having the relationships so that we can bring those stories to light. And so we saw those as yes, we know these things already. This is not a big aha moment, except for the fact that we keep forgetting it. And so we hope that by putting this squarely, that this is something we can all begin to work on together. This is not something that any one of us can do, but it's something that all of us can do. So I would like to then go back to slide number 2 in the sequence. So who's working on this already? Well, we know the mainstream media every now and then comes out with a positive story, but a lot of the stories that they come out with are not so positive and tend to cause a knee-jerk reaction in the public when they hear the word Christianity. So we know that this is not working necessarily in our favor, but it could. Perhaps mainstream media can be captured more effectively than we are doing so today. We have the social media. We have a wonderful organization called Solutions Journalism, led by David Bornstein, who wrote the How to Change the World book. Some of you may have read that. And we have community foundations, which have rich resources of stories but aren't necessarily telling the stories as well as they could. So how can we think about that as a resource? We have Faith and Finance, who's doing some wonderful storytelling. We have preachers from the pulpit who might perhaps be fed stories that they can use as lessons. So somebody, among here in this group may be able to think about how to do that. The Voices Project was mentioned, Texas Methodist, other foundations that you see. Ashoka's doing some of this to think about how we can contribute in this space. Episcopal Enterprises and so forth. Duke, United Way. Somebody who was in another lab mentioned Shifting Ground project at Lake Institute as one that we should be looking at. And we thank you all for those of you who contributed additional ideas. I think the question is, who's missing from this list that we all in this group know about, and who could we amplify the way they see their role as somebody who should be doing more of this? Next one.
When the baby grows up to be an old man,
So the question posed didn't exactly fit our topic, but it's how do we account for inequities? And in this case, I would say think ownership of story. So we see inequities around whose story gets told. There are dominant voices, and there are voices that are actually doing the work that really matter. And there are layers of healing that we see are needed. There are pathways that are needed, stages in that healing process, different perspectives that need to be brought to bear for us to undo a sort of colonialization of consciousness. The idea that my story doesn't matter seems to us to be a barrier to be overcome. And so we asked ourselves such questions as, how can we, in telling the stories, actually acknowledge the power dynamics that exist in these stories? How can we actually just interview and let the storyteller be the conveyor of the message? And how can we support that kind of authenticity? So we asked ourselves also these questions of, how do we help those who have been historically silenced to step into their power, to tell their stories, to feel comfortable doing that? So there are roles that all of us in this room can play in that. And how do we protect against story appropriation? We want the story to be the storyteller's story and to have that authenticity. And this is a tough thing to do when there are dominant voices in the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So we were asked, what is the right, why is this the right thing to do?
now look here.
And we think that the story honors the work that people are doing, their history, their actual personhood, and it tells a truth that only the story can reveal. It reveals who is in the community, not just who are the dominant voices, and it, by doing that, can help combat racism. We also see the very practical use for the stories in that they give ideas to others. They show people the way. They make it possible for people to envision something they could not otherwise envision. And so we see that as a very, very important part of this, in sort of giving other people permission to step into something that's a powerful model. They can see some of the how-tos. So we also, from another lab, we had a useful input, which is, and we need to tell the story that the money is God's, that this is the work we are doing, and that this is what God looks like embodied. And finally, we said to ourselves, let us remember that the difference between being listened to and being loved is so small as to be imperceptible. Capital movement, the next one, please. Yeah. So for us, the capital was not so much about the financial capital, though we believe that if we can develop the social capital that we're talking about here, that it will lead to the financial capital. So we focused on thinking about the relational issues and realizing we need to change our thinking to see our relational networks as our key asset and cease extracting ourselves from our neighbors. We need to see ourselves and our neighbors as one. And so that this building of relationship is absolutely essential to everything we do. We understand that systems are comprised of relationships, of the roles people are playing, the rules of the game we're operating by, the responsibilities that people carry, the resources that are brought to bear. And we need to remap that for each of our efforts and renovate our relational systems in order to be able to tell these stories in an authentic, helpful, really generative way. And finally, someone had the wonderful idea that at the end of the day, what's going to really tell us whether we're succeeding is, do our partners like us? And because if all is about this relational process, then understanding how our partners actually feel about that relationship with us is a pretty good measure of whether it's working. Next slide, please. Okay, yep, we should be good. So the key thing, as we urge all of us to think about, is the ways in which we can put ourselves into the space where we can see and learn from the stories of those people who are bringing that imagination to the solutions with others, and to surface and receive the latent and overlooked gifts, the voices that haven't been heard, who have not dominated the conversation, but who are quietly doing the work that is making the difference. And so this requires being good neighbors. It requires courage to step in with curiosity and relinquish control. It requires that emptying of self to really make room for a relationship with others. And I believe that is it.
Thank you so much. The relationship piece just keeps coming up and coming up. And endowments. Endowments. Who's going? Elizabeth and Elizabeth. Diane. Diane. And we have a lot of folks who need to leave for the airport at about 11:30ish. So I'm changing the rules. 9 minutes, not 10, just to save us 10 minutes to allow everybody that can stay for all of it to stay. Lakers.
In memoriam. So I want to go through the problem statement, and we'll go through this fast, Rosalie, so don't worry about it. We talked about a variety of issues related to endowment. A lot had to do with the opaqueness of it. For an outsider, they don't understand what's happening, and no one's really interested in letting them know how that money is spent. There are always very siloed roles and responsibilities. For example, the grant-making folks are probably separate from the investment folks. The lack of inclusion from community members. I think that we've talked about power shifts and how there is a thought process that if we have the money, A, we should be able to do what we want with it, but B, that we know what's best. And regardless of what we do in an endowment space, that's always going to be there. However, there is no really great track record of endowments really bringing in community members to help guide the stewardship of those funds. And misaligned incentives, like what are we here for? Why are we here? Why does our mission change every 10 years? Or we, get a new set of value statements and we expect the community to just roll through and be with us on that, or whether it's the neighborhood or the congregation or whatever. So all of these things serve as barriers. What you all may have heard was that yesterday, they didn't call themselves revolutionaries. I called them that. Damien and Dan, what's your group? Lanier, Community Access invaded our space because they said they had everything but the money. So they came in and they revelationaries, that's what they called themselves, revelationaries, and they were like, how do we get the money? And we were lucky to have Elizabeth here, who's like the queen of community organizing, so she stepped right into the role. And what was awesome is we had some heartfelt conversations about what can be reasonably expected from folks who have different types of endowments and the barriers that community folks run into all the freaking time. When they, as Lanier says, we have models that work and people don't want to give us money. You know, we talked about maybe there were some people in our spaces that, hey, we can help you, either money or relationships, or you know, maybe this is the wrong audience, and let me help you get in front of the right audience. And we had all those conversations yesterday. So I think for us, for our group, we debriefed on it this morning. It was amazing. It was super fun. So I want to thank you all for being bold enough to do that. So I don't know who has the slides. We can just go to the last slide. Last slide. So this is our 4 best ideas. Thank you all. This is what happens when people show up and say, hey, you guys might be full of crap. So this morning we were like, well, we better come up with some ideas. And we talked about putting together a neighborhood fund of $100 million to fund and organize social and financial capital to invest in place-based projects. 7 cities. I'm calling out the catalytic people. First in capital with a registry of matching funds to go 7X. So, catalytic capital people, I hope y'all next. Because we calling on you. The second piece is a neighborhood marketplace for those organizations and institutions that say, I don't want to put my money in the fund, I want direct investment. Let's create a marketplace where people can choose the projects they want to invest in. DEI, we just need to find some managers that are freaking people of color, just like that has just got to be a priority because that is impactful in and of itself. The non-Capalians is the nuns and the Episcopalians coming together to kick some ass. I don't know if my team, you're good, we're good. Rosalie, here you go.
Got chills because you're calling out things that are needed that you're going to hear about or other people are working on. So that's so exciting. And the whole idea of this event really in so many ways comes from the fact that the nuns have been doing this for 100 years. They started the hospitals, they started all of this stuff, and then it just stopped. And they are the only ones left, were the only ones left doing it. They are dying out. We got to pick that up. So the Episcopalians are gonna take that on, aren't we? Yeah, okay. Yes, okay. So who invaded that room? Lanier, you're up. Tell us about the hostile takeover. And they're hostile in so many ways. They refuse to do the slide deck, but anyway. The slide decks are in Slack, so you're taking pictures, and that's great, but you're also going to get them. You won't be able to hear what Lanier did.
We'll add some slides. Look, we just want to meet these non-Compalians. What was it called? I just want to know some of those. I've never met yeah, thank you. So we got a great group. So I want to make sure that my comments reflect our group. A. B, the diversity of our group was from, very traditional, we want to make the business case, to more revolutionary, we need to, storm the castle, right? And so we spent really our time on the problem, and then best practices, and then our two best ideas. And I just want to summarize those. So and we changed it like everyone else saying, not calling it a problem statement, was how do we subvert racialized capitalism to help those people that have been historically marginalized to own and control land and assets that will generate individual and community wealth. There's a lot baked in there. We spent time talking about what is wealth. Wealth is health, financial wealth, resiliency, ability to protect, education about how to keep and grow and control. So how do we help people own assets that generate revenue, appreciate, they have advantages? And our session 2, we spent time really talking about everyone knows one or more organization in their city, region, state that is doing great work. We met the lady last night at the art gallery building homes. Is a perfect example. But our belief is so many of these individuals are under-resourced and undercapitalized. They're doing great work. They're doing the work of 20 with 2. They don't have access to the best professional experts. Endowments want audits. They don't have capital to pay the auditing firm. And so the ideas were to identify those organizations. And last night I thought a little bit about this, whether we call it, most of the capital in this space has been somewhat place-based. So whether we talk about it as a city, a region, a state, but our idea was to get, the number is specific, and there's a person I sat across from dinner with last night that I enjoyed. It was get $1.1 billion and 36 cents. We said we were gonna make it sound specific. $1.1 billion and 36 cents, right? Of committed capital to solving our problem, which was helping individuals who've been marginalized own and control assets, right? So get $1.1 billion in either 10 cities or regions or places. So it's not total. But the initial start was $1.1 billion of committed capital, 36 cents of committed capital to solving our problem. And we got to do that by either advocacy, by agitation. Again, people are ready to stand on the table and stand out in front of the foundation and stand out in front of the endowment, or business case making, right? And it's interesting. I've been in rooms making these cases, and many of us have as well. And it's disconcerting, borderline infuriating that the case making hasn't worked. It was one of our team members that said, look, I went to 2 Ivy League schools. I've been to Goldman Sachs. I know how to, and I still can't get the capital. And I got 50 examples of people at the best schools, the big corporations, know how to put together a deck and have done it. And so our goal is to identify those organizations, find 20 of them in each place. If it's 20 in Kansas City, 20 in the region of the Northeast, 20 in the city, 20 in a rural area, there's 20. Everybody in this room knows somebody they think are doing some good stuff. We mentioned Local Code. There was something called Seed Colony, Seed Commons, Seed Commons. Pick them. We know, and get each one of those organizations, and we said $50.1 million. The 50 is to do the work. So imagine a lady last night, if she had $50 million to build more houses, to do more community development, and $1 million to expand the capacity of an organization. Internally, adding more staff, externally, legal, financial resources. Not capital plus some working capital, right? Some project capital plus working capital. Because we all know the work we do, people are undercapitalized on working capital as well. And then ultimately, find ways to structure that so that there's a matching investment and ownership in projects hyper-local through crowdfunding or through other vehicles like crowdfunding. So it's big capital plus local community investment at the same time. That's the big idea. And thank you. Anybody want to, the Revelationary? Anybody from the Revelationaries? Okay, thank you all. If anybody wants to add, please, I want to make sure I leave window for that. Thank you.
From either the Revelationaires, they've now become a singing group, a gospel group called the Revelationaires. Yes.
Our group felt the same way. We felt so energized and lifted up by the experience to have this interaction. And so one of the things that we thought was that maybe one of these experiences talk to us about the way the conference is structured. Instead of having spies and bees go a little bit here and there, we don't really bring back the message as well. Maybe we can find out places where there could be, intersection or perhaps, perhaps cross-section, where have a session where one session where these groups do that. Because for us, it was really a wonderful, wonderful experience. So we want to thank everybody for that.
Yeah. We should get y'all's picture back there by the intersections board. Yeah. So I don't know who's next. Whose ownership within local and global world is grossly concentrated and removed due to international structures. Whose opportunity is that? Oh, it's right down there on the bottom. So we've got Elias and Sarah.
Our group was really interesting because we had a little bit tighter focus, or so we thought, when we started out, because we were looking at something I read about as COVID was coming on, which is the estimates were 40% of all black-owned businesses in this country were probably going to be going down. Now, that's completely apart from the thing that we were working on specifically, which was called the boomer fade-out, the silver tsunami, and all those business owners, 80% of them is the estimate, who do not have a workable, viable, likely to succeed succession plan. That is a lot of folks out of work, including big pieces of black and brown communities. So the strategy that a number of groups have been working on to try to fix several problems at the same time is to say we need to put some money together and transition those groups, so these businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises. So this was not exactly global. It was a particular piece of the economy, a particular profile of businesses. Say, 5 to 200 employees. So this work is going on, and the transitions with wonderful groups like Co-op Cincy, 2 members of which were in our group, have had for years strategies to help owners realize they can get a payday, and they can also do something that many of them are fantastically gratified by, which is build, not only build a legacy, but transfer it to the people they have been working with for usually at least 15 years, because that's part of the profile of these silver tsunami businesses. And so what we came up with were strategies around how to build more groundwork for that, lay more groundwork, and also finance that better. And when we get to our 2 big ideas, we'll touch on that. It also triggered a conversation about what we mean by ownership. In other words, why is this the value? What's happening when an employee goes to work and finds out suddenly they are an owner, they're in a new world, there's a different kind of role they're playing. And even more interestingly, and I want Sarah to say something about this, what happens to owners who didn't even realize what that meant? Tell us about your
Yeah, I was probably a hassle in our group, but one of the things I kept bringing is we're talking about employees being owners when the first step is the actual owners of the business not realizing that they have an asset. A lot of the folks we're talking about in these businesses are just going to get tired at some point, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years old, and just shut the door. And for me, that's the biggest scare, and the idea of trying to help those people truly understand they have an asset, it has value, they could sell it, they have lots of options about where they could sell it, and that's what a lot of our conversation was about those options, particularly looking at BIPOC ownership or employee ownership.
We also had a wonderful guest who sat in on our group and kind of elevated things to a new level, Michael Schumann. And if you don't know Michael Schumann's work, the Main Street Journal, the newsletter, he added something important. One of the things he added, well, a couple I'm just going to mention as sort of opportunity spaces. Let's skip over to number 6, please. Yeah, he threw out the idea, the one we seized on was the idea of creating at the municipal level funds that would build and grow this work. And he had a wonderful kind of profile of what's going on with muni bonds. Muni bonds are now being purposed for all kinds of things. It's a much wider range of impact than they've ever had, which is interesting. And then we had another member of our group throw out something we're not really going to talk about because we don't know what it is yet, but the concept of universal basic capital, we thought sounded revolutionary. Well, we're not going to talk about it. We don't even know what it is, but it sounded great. So we're going to pass right on that. Okay. Yeah. Finally, what we got to, we'll go to number 7. Yeah, is that possible? All right, make it quick.
Discontent with the idea of universal basic income. This idea ultimately derives from Louis Kelso, Aesop thinking, along with Aesop's. So the idea of universal basic capital I'm coming up with is imagine every person has like an IRA account. And every year that IRA account is funded with some capital that every individual, this is super hyper local, has the right to invest in local enterprise, local property. Now, how is this possible? Right now, I'm going to give an example of a corporation. A corporation at any time has the ability to grow. A corporation at any state and time has so much ability to grow. In order to grow, it needs capital, investment capital, specific kind of money. Usually they go to a bank. The bank creates that money out of thin air. And it can do that because the corporation is able to borrow from its future because it has plans to create value. And by creating that value, it's able to pay back the loan. And the money supply is increased, but it's justified by the increase in the amount of goods and services produced. Now that also works at the national level. Our nation, every year, has some certain amount of growth potential. And that growth potential is funded by a certain specific amount of new financial capital that's created. The problem is that financial capital only goes to the big corporations and people who already own capital. And another problem is that financial capital doesn't get to all the places, like we're saying, nobody gets capital. So I'm saying that potential, that growth potential belongs to all of us. We create that. So banks could create an account where everyone gets a share of our national growth potential.
Isn't that beautiful? That's simple as pie. We'll make it happen. So more narrowly, and in our last session, of course, we kind of ripped up some of the flooring on this, but what we were aiming at was local business acquisition funds. They could be financed in a variety of ways, including endowments and alternatives. City bonds is where we're focused on mostly. And in a larger sense, local ecosystems of support. We should not have said only cooperative culture, although that was our target conversation mostly. But it's really beyond that. You could call it businesses in the social economy generally, all kinds of enterprises. that have an impact on social economy. I just want to add that it's very striking to me, and I didn't notice it until today, listening to church assets and transitions. The churches are in a way a lot like these businesses. You know, we're flipping the script. We're in a transition mode. Organizational capacity is needed. Asset analysis has to happen, and we do need runway funds to get to this. It's very striking how widespread these issues are across our economy. I never thought of it that way, but it is both the churches and the small to medium-sized enterprises run by older CEOs. They're in the same box. Thank you very much. Sorry? Oh,
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay, and the person who's going to come up here and solve these problems, Rachel, is policy. Yeah. So can you come up and give your report? Or who is? Who's giving the policy report? Shalonda? Yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Shalonda Ingram. I am from St. Louis. I currently reside in DC primarily, but I am nomadic intentionally. And so our group had a unique experience of looking at this conversation of exceptionalism, right? And pretending that we don't know where these policies come from. Like an endowment is like some almighty thing that doesn't have people choosing how it happens, when it happens, who it happens for. Due to the development of our country and the society that we've accepted and that we perpetuate, we assert that policy is a colonialist imposition, okay? On its face, its very existence was utilized to brutalize, harm, and terrorize people for centuries, and it continues. It's a nice way to say, we're gonna do our thing no matter who it harms, okay? And so part of our request and invitation is for us to look at policy as an evolutionary tool, not as a finite substance that governs our lives, right? And when we take that on, policy can and does evolve. We've seen it, and it operates in a space that is emergent, right? And we want to expand that to include people who are performing the labor, to be indulged and a part of the delight that tends to evolve the policymakers exclusively. So that's our invitation and our opportunity. Did I leave anything out? Okay, next slide. Who's working on this? People making policy. Everybody here, right? Community leaders, youth are always working on policy, right? Mostly in their own homes. But part of why we drive this point is that we make our own policies in our own lives, right? I have a policy not to go to Starbucks when I come to a town like this. I find a coffee shop. So I was able to find Cleo's, for example, and that's just my personal policy, because I know that Cleo's is there, and it just takes a little effort for me to make sure I engage with that. Stakeholders, educational centers, anyone trying to set up the rules, all right? And we've made that a very plain statement as not to highlight any particular org or acronym. So we get lost in the relationship to corporations, right? And we have designed this too, so that corporations are like people and people are not like corporations, right? That's a huge problem if ever your personhood was in question, all right? People addressing the process. So part of what we're looking to is the opportunity for local leaders and service providers to become aliases, okay? So if you would not be willing to be impacted by the policy, do not indulge the policy, okay? So if you're not willing to be at the effect of it, then it's not a workable policy. That's what we assert. Next slide. how do we account for these inequities? It's very simple. We just transfer the resources and the assets, which is exactly how we started this thing. That's the whole deal. Next slide. This is around the moral context, and we are very aware of the systems of inequity, and we cannot pretend that those same systems can be trusted to coddle us when they have terrorized us, okay? And we have to stay honest about that and be willing and available for the system to evolve and transform, okay? This will require process. A lot of folks have spoken to this. We're not going to exhaust you. We just want you to know that people make policies and that the way we operate our lives, the way that we engage with our spirits and our souls, is essentially how we engage with everything else. Next slide. The capital movement. Social capital, we're gonna need a planet. We wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that the planet is an asset. Mother Earth is going to require some care for it to exist, for us to consider any of these ideas. Political capital, tax benefits, the minimum wage policies and salary caps, right? So there's a way that if you're on a board or you're a trustee of something, are you reading the materials? Are you just showing up once a month? Are you interrogating whether or not it's appropriate for a steward to generate at a certain level? I want to remind you that these people check the mail, okay? So they kind of know what's happening, and you may be creating harm that you're unaware of. There's different structures for ownership. Some folks have spoken to that. And then there's some dollars staying in the community. Iman and some other folks mentioned, the folks from LA, circulating capital in the community. And we frame that as communities of practice, right? So that the more that we're operating ourselves, our boards, our communities, our teams, in the way that we want the society to work, the evolution will outgrow itself, right? And we can depend on that, for sure. Next slide. Opportunity spaces and ideas. So we talked about this, structures for ownership, creative financing, okay? One thing that I do with the young adults and seniors that serve in partnership with me in DC is that I pay them quickly, right? Utilizing their electronic tools of choice. I do not make them complete paperwork and do things that are irritating for them, right? Because they are coming to work and serve, and I need to make that ministry just as interesting as an Uber job and just as prompt in their payments and treat them like I understand how their money operates and that they are dealing with circumstances that require me to shift, right? And not to exhaust them with paperwork and things that are just not awesome. Thank you. There was something around testing here. Data, did you want to say anything about that? Okay, next slide. Two best ideas. Keep the dialogue evolving. Local economic policy requires communities of practice practicing emergence and growth, right? Build relationships for trust via communication. There's a take me into the room when I'm ready mindset and being available to develop that with folks in your network. Thank you.
Thank you, policy team. That is very helpful for all of us to concrete ideas about what we can do and how we can think about policy. Here you go, Stephanie.
So I'm going to ask my colleague and new best friend, Della, are you in the room? Yeah, come on up. We're going to make it quick, fast, and informative. I'm going to start by saying that we came to a consensus as a group that Della is going to be our spokesperson. So we're actually giving Della the authority to speak for us. She's not doing this in some colonistic, patriarchal way.
Because I am so evil and patriarchal. How would I do that? Okay, super quick. So we had the longest problem statement of everybody. I think we should all be super proud of ourselves for that. And we had a big challenge with this issue of bridging the racial wealth gap because, like a lot of the rest of you hit, there's the picture of the city on the hill that we know that we need to get to, that there's fundamental change needed. But at the same time, if we just sit here and, look to the skies, we're not going to actually make a difference for the people who need to bridge that racial wealth gap. So all through this, you're going to see that tension between, and it's a productive tension, between the big picture, the long term, the city on the hill, and something we can get done right now. So there were really three challenges that we saw as we started breaking into this. One was a problem of knowledge, and that's technical knowledge, how to make the system work for you. And that's also foundational knowledge, that, reframing that understanding of how we relate to each other and why that gap, and we talked about other things to call it, why that doesn't work. The relationships, building the relationships as a means of bridging that gap was crucially important. And the ability to tell the stories, the ability to put forward not just pretty stories, not just happy stories, not just sad stories, but stories that had guts and meat and move people to action. Next slide, please. Who's working on this? Zillions. There's so many different organizations all across the country. And the big challenge that we were encountering was that they're all working in isolation. They're all working individually in their own individual communities. And it's a fragmentation of resources. It's a fragmentation of access. That presents a really significant challenge. Next slide. So how do we account for inequities? Duh, that was easy. Go ahead. So the moral authority, again, we had the idealistic of we are all the children of God and et cetera, et cetera. And then we had the sort of economically practical of, well, we're missing out. There's a return on investment, and we're missing out on economic opportunity, and people who have not been part of the mainstream can solve problems in ways that, people who look like me have screwed up. And then we have the super, super, super practical, at least for, us white types, which is, can we please stop being the asshole in the room, all the time? And I probably I probably offended somebody in here. I'm sorry about that. It's Carla's fault. Next slide. So, in terms of figuring out what the money needed to do, it was really about putting serious effort into making these transitions in knowledge, in systems, and in story happen. We get little drabs of money here and little drabs of money there to tell nice stories about, this organization or that organization or this initiative or some other initiative. But there is no national narrative. There is no national push forward. And on the practical side, there's no comprehensive technical definition. There's no comprehensive practical hands-on, here's how you get yourself out of that morass you're in. Here's how you, as we'll show on another slide, work the system to your advantage. In the meantime, while we're waiting to get to the city on the hill. Next slide. So the opportunity spaces and the ideas. And these are, I'm an economic developer and urban planner. I don't do fuzzy and I don't do kumbaya real well. But to be super practical, we got to do this fuzzy stuff. So building cultural empathy. And we talked about that as a skill, we talked about that as a muscle. Building the ability to make those connections, to be able to sit and be face to face with you and not be a colonizer and not be the asshole. And develop that mutual understanding so that I then see and understand and am really deeply motivated to move to do the things that I can do to bridge that racial wealth gap. At the same time, we want to make sure that people really have the technical skills. And this isn't exclusively a black problem. 2/3 of all people in the US lack basic financial knowledge. That's a recent study. It's just that people who look like me tend to have more of a pad. So we can screw up and like not get hurt so much by it. So we need those skills furiously. And again, that can't just be, a nice little, after school program that looks good over here and, a cute little program over here. It's got to be systemic. It's got to be huge. And finally, to transform relationships and use stories to transform those relationships. Anybody from this group want to say anything else? Because I am definitely not wanting to be the patriarchy. Anybody? Okay, going once. I think we're done.
Thank you, Della and Stephanie and all of you who worked so hard in that room. So I think everybody wants to hear from the Capitol, right? Sorry, but what's Catalytic Capital going to tell us? And Tim Freundlich? You have a group thing going on here? Okay.
Catalytic Capital. Our problem statement didn't really change from yesterday, but not everybody might have heard it. Catalytic Capital is not currently defined by or owned by the people and communities it must be in service to, but that's also our possibility statement, which is you turn it around. I mean, that's, I think, it's embedded. Our design principle is that Catalytic Capital in particular has to be defined by and owned by the communities that it is in service to. And once you flip that around, everything kind of comes from that. And we definitely were super aware that capital is not money only, or even mostly. And that's a design principle that we were carrying throughout our work. And so, it's social relationship capital, it's knowledge and data it's all these assets and the non-market system of stuff. But in terms of who's working on this, everybody and nobody, everybody's working on this stuff. We kind of kept a couple of times throughout the couple days, Katali and Heron as pretty serious organized philanthropies are really turning power structure upside down and have hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal to be peer leaders in the foundation world. So there is some concerted, articulate work going on. Not necessarily the MacArthur's and Rockefellers, though. We don't think that they've turned it around. We think they've just deepened catalytic capital as a definition. You can go. We went through all of the processes and that we kind of tried to capture and post in here, but restorative justice is kind of like the punchline here, and it's that literally life on Earth and lives are at stake. That's the sense of immediacy and alarm that we had. And then in terms of what's the next one? We kind of landed on the capital. It's like a lack of will, right? Like we were saying, a couple of people, it's like the stuff can move. You just have to change your mode. You just got to get serious about it. We've constrained ourselves, we've constipated ourselves with policies and articles of incorporation and institutionalization to the point that we can't move fluidly where we need to go. So let's just undo that and reframe everything. So that's great. And then in terms of opportunities, we got really into clusters around how sources of money could be changed, tools and uses and types of capital, CDFI, risk capital, like all that kind of stuff. But that, we really landed on 2 ideas. And the first one we're going to outline for you because they really bundled up all that.
Someone mentioned in our group that, and we recognize capital is more than financial capital, but someone in our group mentioned that financial capital is a lot like water. Like water will flow to where it's always flowed before, right? And so if you think of financial capital like water, you have to channel it. Like nothing is more catalytic than water, and it has to get to the right places in the right amount at the right frequency. You know, it can't be too quick at the right time for it to truly be as catalytic as it can be. And so a lot of what we talked about is sort of like, what are the conditions? What is the readiness? What's the environment on the ground to kind of get to catalytic capital, for capital to be catalytic? So we talked about kind of a process or a framework that would include discovery, decision-making, and action for capital to truly be catalytic, for it to be owned by community. And we recognize that that needs to include a change narrative. I think the very first group that went, Assets in Transition, talked about flipping the script. Like there's an element of that change narrative that needs to happen within our communities in terms of how I see my neighborhood with new eyes, how I see my neighbor with new eyes, but also how other people outside of our community see us and see us as a place where we as community members are in control of our own destiny, etc. We recognize, though, that there need to be new systems of decision making and then sort of community visioning and planning, but also then implementation and action. We recognize, too, with that second bullet point, there needs to be more capacity building and amplifying local community quarterbacks, convening agencies, backbone organizations, all of those entities that have the trust of our community members that we can invest in so that they can kind of help carry that community message forward and then implement that community plan in kind of a meaningful way. We think defining capital kind of by the community ownership kind of gets us to where we need to go and makes us more ready for capital to be catalytic.
So the visual framework that we designed over the last couple of days involves these 3 components, and we think that they all need to be present for capital to be truly catalytic. I want to start with the community visioning process. So we want for capital to truly be in service to people and communities. We want a community visioning process, a deep listening process, where the members of a community or a neighborhood take the time to express or listen to so that we can arrive at something that the community feels is truly theirs. We ask them, what do you want your community to look like, feel like, be like in 5 years or 10 years or whatever. The second piece is identifying that authentic leadership. We need to work with people who are in neighborhoods, who are in communities, who perhaps they already have the capacity to sort of lead a process like a community visioning process, but we need to work with people who are living there in those spaces, who are deeply rooted. And then finally, in some cases, we have folks who are ready to step into that role, but they still need some capacity building. So we want to connect people in neighborhoods with resources and with technical capacity to carry out work related to this capital that we want to bring in. And then I want to explain the hearts. The hearts are trust. We think trust is really important in all of these relationships.
So the second idea we talked about was envisioning a method of sorts to try to unconstipate a little bit this capital, to actually move it, to shift it, to redirect water flow slightly. And we began to envision this idea of taking the framework and then expanding that or firming it up in some way to to a certification of sorts for funders or investors, a little bit like LEED certification does for buildings, right? To encourage, reward good uses of capital, good behavior, maybe a little bit of shaming or of accountability for those that are talking a good talk but not really actually engaging in the framework in any meaningful, viable way. So to really sort of say, is that actually what you're doing? Are you actually moving that capital within this framework? And if so, then yeah, let's lift that up. Let's encourage that, and let's have funders be sort of rewarded for that, and then also help funders understand how to engage with that framework and how to move from idea to sort of actually doing it. Like, we might think great things about environmental justice or caring for the environment, but we got to actually build buildings that do that, like the LEED certification. Sort of similarly here. Yeah, we like to talk a big talk about catalytic capital, but are we actually doing it? And so finding ways to encourage that and commit to this framework that's centered in community.
And I would just add, this really lives within that community visioning leg of that last triangle that you saw, bringing funders in early, and although they're in service to the community, involving them in the design process so that they know what they're signing on to and how they're giving away power based on trust and process and articulated design. Katali and Heron and folks, there is a movement afoot towards this, but like trust-based philanthropy as a correlative, it's like, if you trust in the process, we feel like this actually isn't as ridiculous an idea as it might be. And B Corp and other sort of correlatives that are out there have really led the way of a really broad-based, and then community by community throughout the country, you have a national branded platform of certification and a movement that's articulated.
Thank you. So that was the last of the design labs, but many of you have been asking, what's next? Will we be doing this again? Different thoughts about where we're going to go from here. I want to start off by saying all of this material is going to stay in the Slack channel, and I said to the design lab leaders a couple of weeks ago that we want to use it as much as we can. There's like a 15% chance that an app is going to be used after the conference or will survive and live. But this one has been so active. We want to keep this conversation going, and we're going to open it up to other people probably in about a month. Do some refining of what's in there. But I want to turn the microphone over to Damon Hargis, who's been our local host and has helped us so much with this, to give a few words.
Well, thank you all. First of all, I wanted to say to everybody from the Neighborhood Economic Team, just that's here, to raise your hand. Give them a hand for putting all this on. Also, Kevin and Rosalie, much thanks for your brains and the genius and muscle to push this through. You know, one of the things as we think about leaving here, I reflect back on all the conversations, not in your sessions, but the side conversations and the side meetings. And a lot of the questions y'all were asking is about what do we do next? And, you know, I thought it would be a shame to not say, make an ask. And Tim, Rosalie, and I talked about it. We think it would be a shame to bring all of this here and not have something to offer.
I mean, a really obvious way to do it that I think is in keeping with sort of this idea of neighborhood economics is we had 18 pretty interesting and amazing ideas that obviously had centers of gravity and energy, and letting those just kind of fizzle out and maybe show up as content in a 6 or 9 or 12 months seems like a waste. Like, I think creating sort of an advisory teams made up of folks who either were involved or want to be involved and write themselves into the story of taking the development of these ideas forward is something that neighborhood economics can do. So I think we can follow up and sort of encapsulate the ideas and try to form like the dine around tables that we didn't necessarily do, but so the ask is to really think about which one, or maybe two if you've got time, that you can volunteer to step into, so that we can sort of carry these forwards and find out who can take them up and execute them, find out where major funding can come from for them, organize community around them, and take them forwards, and so that it isn't just a hollow revisit of the same ideas, but we actually are moving forwards. And also, whether you can or can't do that, I think, you know, the invitation that's in the QR code, if you have economic resources and would like to, you can't run everything on Volunteer Engine, so I think there needs to be some curation and support of that from some program staff that we'll find grant money too to really take it forwards, but that, you know, click on that code and you know, and contribute if you have some extra energy in your pocket.
Yes, thank you. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in events. And if we can count on you not only to volunteer and help us find the funders to keep this work moving forward, because we like to talk about events as Halloween stores, you know, and it's a great job for somebody for about 6 weeks, and then the tent goes down and those people go find another job. If we have to start over with a whole new crew of people to do our next event, it's a lot harder and a lot of wisdom is lost. So anything you can do, but the most important thing I want to ask you to do is to pinky swear right now, and I may ask you to stand up because I'm an Episcopalian and you have to do these things while you're standing up, but to think for just a minute, what is it that you've heard today that you are solid enough, excited enough, encouraged enough that you will spend time working on when this conference is over. So think about that for just a minute. Yeah. Yeah. Does everybody have something they're going to take home and they're going to work on? Melissa right now is going to start a Slack channel. She's opening her computer. It's going to be what I'm going to work on. And we know people have to get to the airport, so we're not going to stop and have everybody stand up because we'll be here another hour and a half. But I want to ask every one of you to put something in the Slack channel, just what I'm going to work on. What I'm going to work on. And we're going to keep Slack going. The next idea, what's next for us, we've had a lot of people ask us, is that we are hoping to do this event again, very similarly to this event in another city in about 6 months. And a couple of cities are talking to us about it already. We want to get them in a bidding war. You know, what city can bring the most resources. And we're also hoping to do some regional events or local events. Leroy Barber, who is at Ashkenazi Hospital right now, who is coming onto this team in the fall, and is going to be helping us do that. If everyone can also send a prayer for Leroy. They still don't know what's wrong with him. His wife has flown in from Portland and is with him now. And anything you might do in terms of prayers, or if you know Leroy, to reach out to him and Donna as well, that would be great. But Leroy's coming on board, and we're going to hopefully do another event in March. That's kind of our goal, and everybody got their idea? Okay, open Slack. She's working on it. Open Slack. Get your idea in there, and thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in March, we hope, or before, and definitely later today on Slack, okay? So let's keep Slack moving. Oh, yeah. So it's already started. South Bend wants us. If you have a city that wants neighborhood economics, South Bend is now on the list. They were the first one to talk to us. Cincinnati wants us back. We've started this thing. Yeah. Fort Wayne. Okay, Fort Wayne. Yeah.
Hey, scribes, if you have notes that didn't make it onto the particular slides but that are still useful, would you just email them to me? Take a picture of them if they're handwritten, whatever, but scribes, I welcome any of your notes so that we can capture as much of this conversation as possible.
And hang on to your wooden nickel. You don't know what it's going to be worth. We're going to figure that out. Your wooden nickel. There are more wooden nickels on the desk on your way out if you want to pick one up. If you didn't get a wooden nickel, a 1 common cent.